All right, we're back. We're live. What's up, party people? My name is Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. I've got a really interesting gentleman. His name is Vitaly Golom. He's the managing partner at Capital. He's a investment banker and venture capitalist. And one of his favorite topics also happens to be my favorite topic, which is robotics. So, Vitaly, how's it going, man?
Hey, Sunny, good to see you. Doing
Yeah,
well.
likewise. So yeah, I guess do you want to? I mean, I feel like we should just dive right into the deep end. Maybe in terms of a little bit what we were talking about prior to hitting the go button. You said that any country that hits 20% unemployment goes fastest. And AI is about to make that real, right? So can you defend it? Like, I mean, Spain, maybe Greece. Talk about what's going on out there, and how did you land on this kind of bold statement?
Yeah, I've been working on my second book called The Displacement Machine, and it's about radicalization, mostly of young men in America and other Western countries, but mostly America. And the research is a little staggering. I grew up and built my career in Silicon Valley around tech, and kind of we've always started. We always thought that tech would be a force of good for the positive. Everybody wants to make a positive change in the world. Somewhere along the lines that changed, and tech is now the biggest industry and controls a lot of things, and now is driving the fourth industrial revolution of AI. And where the first industrial revolution gave us steam, coal, the factory. It took about 100 years, about 3 to 4 generations for population to adapt to that new reality. The second industrial revolution gave us electricity, mass production. That took about 50 years, 2 generations, right? It was tough for countries and for people to adapt, but they did it. The third revolution is arguably the information revolution. We got computing, internet, mobile. That took about 40 years, right? Starting kind of in the 70s and 80s. And that all happened within 1 year, within one generation. And we can all remember how tough that was. But now we are in this AI revolution, which is giving us foundation models, agents, robotics. All of this is happening within 10 years. And it is a fraction of one generation. So this idea of a truck driver with a high school education retraining to become a software developer, which was a popular topic a few years ago, even that's not relevant anymore, right? And what we see, a lot of these kind of this grift economy that's popped up about, manosphere podcasts selling you all sorts of things and crypto and supplements and all these things and kind of the gambling economy because young men don't feel like they can compete in the old money economy. All of that's popped up primarily in these displaced, kind of economically displaced areas. Whereas 25 years ago, somebody could graduate high school, they know they can get a union job in Ohio, building cars, and they can start a family based on that. Now all of that's kind of evaporated. So the industrial base of the U.S. has been hollowed out over the last couple of decades with manufacturing leaving, and you can directly correlate, the opioid epidemic, all these things kind of map very perfectly onto that because people lost their sense of community and their entire kind of structure, not just their jobs, which is the obvious part. And a lot of those people retrained to simple administrative jobs, insurance, billing, customer support, etc. And those things are the first ones to get automated away with AI. And there's kind of two camps. There's one camp that's kind of ringing the alarm bells. I tend to obviously kind of see a little bit over the horizon into that camp a bit. But Goldman Sachs is part of that camp, right? If you read all their prognosis on very real chance that we have 10 to 20% unemployment in the coming next few years from all of this. And then there's a camp that basically says that it's alarmist, it's not going to happen. We're not, and they're using evidence saying that big enterprises don't see ROI in AI yet. But we already see a lot of tech unemployment, a lot of tech layoffs. We're the tip of the spear, but the industry itself in Silicon Valley here is eating itself. And we see a lot of tech layoffs, tens and tens of thousands of people being reduced, A, because of automation, but B, because they need that capital to invest into all the data center tech, right? Into the data center infrastructure, which happens to have for the last 2 years been really the primary of not, if not the only driver of US GDP growth, is all the infrastructure build out for data centers for AI. So we're kind of all in. And the only way these companies are going to make the ROI and kind of fill into these crazy valuations that they have and keep growing as fast as Anthropic and other companies do is by absorbing major labor markets, right? So you have this really powerful group that needs to do that to be able to keep growing, because that money is not going to come out of nowhere. It's going to replace jobs with automation. And then you have you have politicians that are kind of sitting on their hands while the Moore's law in AI and robotics is 3 times faster than Moore's law was in computing, right? So we're down to like 6 months of doubling power and technology, and that's only accelerating. So a little bit grim from my perspective. It's a little bit scary to see all these things coming together and all these pieces kind of falling into place. And I think a lot of society, they're not technological enough to understand exactly what's happening at this stage because they're not paying attention to it. But B, they're also busy with life and just trying to keep their head above water. But ultimately, all these things, fascist societies and all these things come up, and revolutions happen when you have a big group of people, usually something that resembles a middle class, that loses their status. And that's what happened in Weimar Germany, right? In the course of 3 years, the middle class in Germany lost all of their power. And that's how the Nazi Party came about, right? If they didn't have that economic strife, it would have been a very different story. So these are all, you have to study history to understand what's going to happen in the future. And we have a lot of red flags popping up right now in American society, and, slightly different, but similar in Europe. And we have competition with China, alongside it. So that's kind of what I think about.
So, can you kind of like walk me through the actual mechanism? Not like the people lose jobs and get angry, but like what's the chain from like an idle population to a man on a podium promising order?
Well, I mean, it's, the feeling of losing something is a lot stronger than not gaining something, right? So this is why, revolutions come from displaced middle class, so people losing status rather than the lower class not getting the opportunities that they think they should get, right? So that's for starters, that's a very important thing to think about. And we have these, why do we have the administration we have now? Is because we had this guy who basically said all your economic problems are you can point your finger and blame it on immigrants or you name it on the other group, and they're the source of all your problems. When in reality, it's a systemic problem, right? Hardworking Mexican or South American immigrants coming to the U.S. for decades. I mean, I'm in St. Carlos, California. That's a we were part of Mexico up until not that long ago, a few generations ago. So, but this idea of immigrants that have always come to this country, that's what this country is made of, all of a sudden being the villains that are taking away your jobs and this and that. It's nonsense. And you use these kind of scapegoats to be able to kind of rile up the population, so they ignore the actual problem that need to be solved, that are systemic and economic, and instead you kind of just point them at a common enemy, and you organize them around a political movement around that, just to power. It's a classic. It's a really, really classic, really, really simple playbook that's being played on us again.
So, is the danger the unemployment or the speed? A country can absorb maybe 20% over a decade, but I guess what happens when AI does it in 18 months? Is that like, I guess, or is it both of those variables? But what worries you more?
Well, the problem is that we have people that are not going to be they're not going to be productive or useful in the new economy, right? They don't have the skills. So the last industrial revolution gave us high school as a standard, right? This level of education as a standard, because that's what it took then to be functioning member of society and be able to earn a living. Now, the question is, a few years ago, everybody was telling everybody to become software developers, and look, look where we are now, right? Software developers are getting laid off, and everything's getting automated, and all the best software developers I know haven't written a single line of code since probably December of last year. So it's a question of, okay, fine, let's retrain people. Practically speaking, somebody with a high school education, not a college education, and in their 40s or 50s, like what are you going to retrain them to do? The other aspect is, we're fundamentally breaking the labor and capital partnership, right? In capitalism, right? You have capital that pays labor to produce things, and if we're talking about roboticizing all the factories and everything, then you just don't need labor, right? You just have the capital. Now the catch 22 there is that if you have a bad economy and you have everybody out of work, who are you going to sell your products to, even if you automate production? So it is a bit of a flywheel in a sense, but it's very lumpy and kind of the way we're progressing there. There's a lot of emphasis on let's automate, 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 but there's not a lot of emphasis like let's make sure that society can absorb all these products. And our economy, U.S. economy, is primarily consumer driven. So how do we preserve a healthy? So people like to say they're single issue voters. I'm a single issue voter, and my issue is economics. Because if you don't solve that, nothing else matters, right? People are not going to be happy. Obviously, human rights as the basis, but all these factors and not to get too deep into politics, but there's certain groups that promise a lot and do exactly the opposite, and their track record exact opposite of that on economics.
Interesting. Who goes first? Which country breaks before the others, and why?
It's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of incentive right now in the U.S. to automate as fast as possible. Europe, although they're falling behind in technology, right? Arguably, they do have a lot of guardrails already in place. Kind of the joke in Silicon Valley is that Europe likes to innovate on governing technology that wasn't invented in Europe. But on the other hand, they are much better at protecting and providing a safety net for society. So, for example, if you get laid off in US, you get a small check for 26 weeks and a good luck. In some countries like Denmark, if you find yourself out of a job, you are going to, first of all, you're going to get a lot more, as a percentage of your old salary, but you're also going to have a place to go to every day and check in and retrain and be part of a community, so you don't lose that community aspect. There's a book and documentary, Bowling Alone, right? The question was like these bowling leagues that people used to have, that was community, right? Just like churches are, just like any kind of organized religion, the main value there is having a community. And people are, social animals. We need that peace. We can't live in solitude. So other countries are doing a better job, and surprisingly, China has started passing laws, basically making it illegal for companies to lay off people and replace them with automation without paying them out, really, really long severance or not at all. So right now, U.S. is the land of the free, but usually that means that there's no guardrails for a very long time until we hit a wall. This time the wall is pretty hard and pretty scary. So we need politicians and legislators who know what's going on and can keep up with this and can put the right guardrails in place, because for companies the incentives are not there. Their incentives are to maximize profits and growth within the legal or quasi-legal construct, kind of ask for forgiveness, not for permission. So all these things are, really, really not great coming together. And US, to answer your question shortly, US is probably the one that's at the tip of the spear as far as the effects, benefits and effects.
Hey, Vitali, help me push back on yourself, right? Every prior automation wave, right? Looms, tractors, the PC, essentially destroyed categories and created more jobs than it killed. Why is AI the one that doesn't?
Well, before I do that, if you think back a couple of years ago, right, this was the argument, hey, this is going to create a bunch of new
Vitali, do you
jobs.
mind if I eat some Thai food while you're talking?
Go for it.
Okay, sorry, my wife just gave me some and it smells so good.
No worries. Yeah, I mean, that was the argument a couple of years ago, where it says, oh, well, what about this new job of prompt engineer? Think about it. When's the last time you heard somebody talk about being a prompt engineer? Like that's really non-existent. So the question is, okay, sure, let's take that argument and be optimistic. What kind of jobs can we create? I mean, I think the most optimistic thing is that everybody, and I told this to my teenage kids, is the number one skill is gonna be an entrepreneur, because you can build a billion-dollar company by yourself, right? And so
Thank
that's the
you. By the
positive.
way, I'm glad you said that. Yeah. Because like that I was gonna say the exact same thing, Vitaly. That's where I think this goes. is I don't think I have
Yeah.
any counter against what you're saying, that jobs, it's hard to say that, but may very well disappear. But I feel like it will almost force humanity into like entrepreneurship, right? Like
To an
everybody
extent.
has to
Yeah.
become a, I mean, maybe they can't or whatever, but like I think everyone will kind of have to become an entrepreneur, a creator, some sort of independent like being where they can expand their, ability to execute and research and do all these things that AI can do. But yeah, but it's like how do we get there, right? That's always like the
Yeah, I mean, for Gen Z, this is easier because they grew up with a computer in their hands and ultimately the whole world in their hands,
right.
and they're native to it. I'm a little bit older. I remember when making the transition to computing, um, but my teenage kids, they're probably a generation that's native to it. That said, we still have baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials who are, millennials and Gen X are in the most productive parts of their careers right now, and it's going to be very, very rough on this population, especially like elder millennials and Gen Xers who are old enough to have had, 20, 30-year careers plus at this point, and it's going to be very difficult for them to make the transition. So what happens to them? Maybe Gen Z is more entrepreneurial. Maybe we see a lot of companies, the structure of companies and how things are done really change. I could see that. And then the skill set that you need is basically you can't specialize anymore. You can't just be a software developer or just a marketer. You have to, the curriculum will be, here's how marketing works, here's how sales works, here's how general management works, here's how technology works, and all these things you'll have to put together and then find where your talents stand out, and a lot of soft skills, right? That's the positive part, is that you're going to have people who need to deal with people, and can't really do things in isolation. But regardless, let's say we make the transition. I mean, we'll have to make a transition one way or another. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's just going to be very difficult and painful. And there's a book from one of my, I'd say probably personal mentors. I kind of grew up with Mike Malone, who wrote the book about the Protein Corporation, basically having, and he wrote this book many years ago about kind of what companies will look like in the future, where you have a small core team and then you have a lot of contractors and things floating around, which is already kind of happening, depending on how you're building your companies. And then the other one is called The Fourth Turning is Here, and that's more of a book about kind of the natural cadence that we have, the natural 80 or 100-year cadence and the four seasons we have in civilization, which basically says in the tracks that we are in a crisis period right now. We're in the winter period, and that's going to last another 5 to 10 years before we reach the spring, which should be another very positive period. But the next 5 to 10 years are going to be pretty bumpy, and it probably always feels when you're going through it with each one of these century cycles. The winters always felt tough. The last winter was 30s and 40s, right? 1930s and 40s, before we reached the 50s as a nice spring period and the positive period. But we have to get through it, right? And we're in the middle of a world war right now. If you ask people if they were in World War in 1941, they would have said no. But looking back, World War was, depending on how you count, from the early 30s to the mid 40s. And now we're in the midst of it as well, with Russia attacking Ukraine and the attack on Israel and the response, and now Iran and China kind of sitting back and waiting for the right time to pounce on Taiwan. So that'll be the last shoe to fall. And they have their own economic issues, and whenever a country that size has economic problems, they tend to start wars. So it's a lot of things to watch out for. It's just a period we're going through. There's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. The question is kind of, what does society look like on the other end, and how fast can we get through this crisis period?
So you raise capital for a living and you co-founded, or well, I was gonna say, like, so you're funding the thing you're warning about, right? Kind of,
Mm,
or
yeah,
how do
can't
you
beat them,
kind of,
join them, right?
how do you reconcile those two
Yeah.
worlds?
Yeah, no,
Maybe.
it's a good question. We struggle with that. So I mean, we have two sides. We have Mafka Capital, which is an investment banking practice. So what that means is companies hire us to help them raise growth financing, more complicated venture rounds and beyond, all the way to public markets, or to find a buyer, M&A. And we work in, we have several partners in the firm. We work in 6 different sectors where we have a lot of expertise and keep an eye on the market. So that's been going for a few years. Before that, I ran a mobility and climate tech practice at another firm that's well known in the investment banking space. Before that, I started HP's corporate venture arm, HP Tech Ventures, and before that, I was an entrepreneur my whole career. Um, and we're also launching a venture fund focused on robotics because it's hard to ignore this automation. Our approach is, it's inevitable, right? You can't stop technology. This is going to happen. We want to have a positive impact, right? So the companies that are replacing labor with robotics and automation, they also need to have an answer of how they're going to positively affect the labor force in the short term, right? Long term, when you're building a company like that, a venture-backed company, and you want to become a public company one day, you have to think 10, 20 years ahead what the company is going to look like. But again, kind of during this crisis period, the next like 5 years of this transition that's going to feel really kind of white knuckle, we need to talk about it. We need to provide solutions. We need to guide legislators to put the right guardrails in place for industries to kind of really do this in a controlled manner. But robotics and kind of embodied AI, which is every camera, every vehicle, every warehouse, every factory, all these things are getting automated, and it is the fastest growing technology wave of all time. It's a 39% compounded annual growth rate for the next 15 years, which will take us to like a $76 trillion market across just 5 sectors that we track. So it's going to happen, and people need to deal with it. And kind of trying to fight it is futile. The question is like, how do we ease the transition for people who are affected most? But in reality, we're all going to be affected, right? We started the investment bank a few years ago, and we're AI first. We use a lot of automation from day one. But now in our industry, in I would think every industry, it's an arms race, right? Everybody is using automation. If you're not, you're going to fall behind. You won't be competitive. So everybody's becoming more efficient, and kind of the general kind of minimum level of service, minimum level of information that's required to operate in any particular business, especially service, is rising. So yeah, I mean that's the reality. Is we want to have staying power. We're not just going to give up and live in the woods off the land. We're going to continue participating in the in the tech world, and having some positive influence, hopefully, on what happens.
So you wrote the moat is dead, right? So if proprietary tech is no longer the moat, kind of in an AI world, then what is, and what are you actually underwriting now that you write a check?
Yeah, so I wrote an article. It got a lot of attention, called "The Mode is Dead," and that's really about software. A lot of friends who are software investors, who are really successful software investors of many, many years, and I've had a lot of conversations this year. They said, look, I usually make 2, 3 investments a month, and I've made 1 investment this year, because I can't see anything that has staying power, that can't be completely erased by somebody vibe coding their product over a weekend, right? All of that has become fast. So having a piece of software is no longer a moat. Having proprietary data, having proprietary your own models, not sitting on top of Claude or OpenAI, having some kind of insight, having relationships with a certain category of customers, those are moats, right? And then certainly for us, we're dealing with robotics and physical things. Manufacturing still, there's still some moats in being able to build physical things. And interestingly, for the last 20 years or so, maybe 15 years, Silicon Valley has been like software eats the world. Everybody's focusing on software. Impossible to fund anything with a factory, with a BOM, bill of materials. And now we're coming back to it. Everybody, all these like software VCs, all of a sudden like, oh yeah, we do robotics. We love robotics, and it's interesting to watch them come back, because also, the argument was always, okay, if something physical, the capex required, the capital investment required to build a business like that is so high, because you have to buy inventory, you have to build a factory, all these things. Well, what do you have to do if you're a major AI player? You have to spend 10 times that on data center infrastructure. So now it's cheaper to go back to hardware, go to robotics and those kind of things.
Funny.
So it's
I
it's
uh,
it's
I
interesting and cyclical. Yeah.
I actually started my career in robotics. I spent the first decade working in robotics. I used to work for a company called Quanzer up in Canada, it was founded by this gentleman by the name of Dr. Jacob Apkarian, who worked on the Canada Space Arm, and we essentially built robots for all the top engineering institutions around the world, like MIT, Stanford, Georgia Tech, and so yeah, but it's crazy because like back then we were working with UGVs and quad rotors and all that stuff, right? But it felt like super super niche, like super like futuristic, almost like this will never make it. People
Yeah.
just aren't excited about this. But now it's like wozers, like I think people are putting it together, like when they see
Yeah.
ChatGPT and what's possible with intelligence, and then you start marrying that with control systems and mechatronics, and it's going to be an interesting future. Vitali, man, I'm only like scratched the surface of my questions. I feel like I could ask you another like 20, but I want to be cognizant of your calendar. I know we've only got a few minutes left together. We should do a part 2 if you're up for it. And like I
Sure.
said, robotics, AI, these are all areas that I've spent a lot of time in thinking about. I just interviewed, for example, the gentleman who coined the term AGI last month on my show, which is just wild. And so, yeah, I think a lot about these things you're talking about, right? And so it'd be nice to continue. But before we let people go, maybe just tell them, where they can learn more about your fund, your kind of are you blogging? Like, where are you sharing your thoughts more? I think you mentioned
Yeah.
you had a podcast, but you don't now. But yeah, where do people find out more about you?
Yeah. I did a podcast on mobility a few years back, and it was a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work. So my hat off to you on the production. I do a lot of writing. It's on LinkedIn, it's on Medium. We have a Substack from Mavka Capital, MAVKA, as you can see behind me. And we almost weekly we put things out. We also have our newsletter that goes out to many people every week, called Mavka Report. So you can go to mavkareport.com, and we actually track transactions and kind of big news across several different tech categories, and announce different things. We also do a monthly event in Bay Area called Hard Things. It's specifically on physical AI and robotics. So we do that approximately once a month in Palo Alto and San Francisco. So we're quite active. You can find me out there, and we'll be happy to hear from folks who are either working in the space or have the same kind of economic concerns. Hopefully, the book will be out a little bit later this year, and get people talking and thinking about solutions and not just holding their head in their hands.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I see we have a lot of people listening live. Thank you all for tuning in. And yeah, and for everyone that checks out in the future. Until next time, thank you, Vitali. Really appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Sunny.
Stick around for 1 minute, Vitali. I'll bring the stream to an end.